Thank you, Mr. Rosakis. I call Mr. Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of this distinguished court. Mr. Yursel, the applicant, is a television journalist, and he's ended up with a criminal record as a result of his work as a professional journalist. He does not believe he deserves the opprobrium of having been convicted of aiding and abetting the dissemination of racism. The programme contributed more to the defence of minorities from racial discrimination than their exposure to hatred and that discrimination.
Today we honour Kevin's life, and when we think about how great was his life, there are some words and special characteristics of Kevin that come to mind. The first is the way he defined himself. He used to refer himself as the person of the 3 A's because he was the advocate, he was the activist, and he was the academic. And in the 3 of them, he always excelled. But in addition to that, I will add other very beautiful characteristics he had that made his life really unique. The first one was that he was a man with vision, the visionary. He was a person with the capacity to imagine the future and to actually make it happen. A person with the capacity to understand who was needed to do what and to get where we needed to get. And that made him really, really unique. He was always warm and wonderful with people. He always said to people how wonderful each person was. And I think that was something unique about him because you always felt absolutely special, loved, supported, encouraged. And I think that by doing that, he actually managed to get people to go, 1,000 miles ahead. So Kevin was a fantastic man, and we are very happy to celebrate today his life.
I'm very pleased to be asked to share a few of my memories of Kevin Boyle, who will always remain for me one of the most inspiring and remarkable figures in the field of human rights that it has been my privilege to know. I first met Kevin some 40 years ago when we were both young junior counsel in a series of cases before the European Commission of Human Rights. He for the applicants and I for the United Kingdom government. They were cases involving Northern Ireland. We took evidence together first in the Maze prison in Northern Ireland, and then cloistered in a judge's lodgings in the south of England. Although we were opponents at a strained time for relations between Ireland and the United Kingdom, it was the greatest pleasure to be with Kevin in the same cases. In the courtroom, he was a strong and fearless advocate, totally committed to his clients, at all times scrupulously fair in his dealings. But outside the courtroom, he was a delightful colleague, warm, friendly, and ever helpful. As a result, we became firm friends, meeting regularly at human rights conferences and other functions. In about 1994, when I had become a member of the European Commission, I was invited by Kevin to Essex to speak about the convention. And at the end of the meeting, Kevin and Françoise Hampson drew me aside to tell me, or perhaps better to warn me, that they had that day lodged with the Commission a large number of applications against Turkey concerning the treatment of Kurds in the southeast of the country during the long conflict with the PKK. Complaints of the utmost gravity involving torture, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and the destruction of villages. This was the beginning of an extraordinary period in the life of the Commission, when much of our time was devoted to investigating these cases through the taking of oral evidence by delegates of the Commission, initially in Diyarbakir in southeast Turkey, and later in Ankara. I was privileged to take part in a large number of these fact-finding missions. The work of Kevin and Françoise, who represented the applicants in these missions, is simply beyond praise. Courageous, tireless, and always immaculately prepared, they brought their very considerable advocacy skills to bear, not only in calmly eliciting accounts of their treatment from the numerous villagers, many of whom were nervous and bewildered by the proceedings, but in cross-examining expertly members of the security forces, prosecutors, and other officials. Equally important, they took under their wing and taught by example young Turkish lawyers, instilling in them the courage and confidence to take on and present cases themselves. It's difficult to overstate the importance of these missions or of the cases they represented in developing the jurisprudence of the Convention organs under the core Articles 2, 3, 5, and 8. It's difficult also to overstate their importance for Turkey itself in shining a light on a dark era in that country's history, and in helping to bring about the remarkable changes which we have witnessed over recent years. But for Kevin, these cases would never have seen the light of day, and no one could have more richly deserved their title as Human Rights Lawyers of the Year in 1998 than Kevin and Françoise. Kevin's tragically early death has been a great loss to the bar, a great loss to the academic world, but above all, an irreparable loss to the cause of human rights, in which Kevin will always remain a towering figure.
To me, he was a friend, a mentor, a hero, a warrior, a warm, incredibly generous personality, very funny, often when he didn't mean to be, innovative, deeply analytical, a facilitator, an enthusiast, a motivator. He was a force of nature, Kevin. For the last 5 years I've been the chair of the Human Rights Committee at the Law Society of England and Wales, and I've met many very brave, very clever, very dedicated people from all across the globe, but I've never met another Kevin. He was unique, and it was a great honour for me to know him. Wherever you are, Kevin, we all love you, and you never got what you deserved, but you were a treasure to us all.
He was an activist in the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Movement, and I was 4 years old when he took part in the Long March from Belfast to Derry, which culminated in violence in the Burntoller Bridge when they were attacked by loyalists and the police. I was drawn to human rights for I think the same reasons that Kevin was drawn to them. Our experiences in Northern Ireland and the troubles that marked my upbringing for 30 years. Kevin convinced me to do the LLM at Essex when I was working at Amnesty International.
The first I came across Kevin was just in his capacity as a really first-rate human rights lawyer. I was working at Amnesty International's legal office. He was sent on mission to observe a trial in the Gambia. He produced a trial observation report, which was far and away the best one I had seen from any of the many very accomplished trial observers that Amnesty would send around the world. We then came together again as I joined the staff here at Essex.
So I have a couple of things that sit in my mind about Kevin, and two of them are attributes of, I would say, personality. One is a perpetual twinkle in his eye, and the other is a very big heart. And the two come together in what I remember Kevin for as a person who loved people. And because he loved people, I also think it made him hate injustices to people. And that didn't make him down or dour, but it made him actually uplifting and inspiring because he wanted people to live good, full lives. And he would show that through his interest, through his excitement, through his energy, and essentially his love. And that's what I remember about Kevin.
Kevin, for me, was one of these pivotal people in your life, my life. He made me realize that academic work was both interesting on its own, but above all, could be used outside, could be used to really make a difference. So he is, and has been, and I say is because he's still with me, a wonderful person.
In the field of human rights, of course, we have many, many people who are devoted to their causes and who are very, very committed to helping promote human rights, but maybe not all of them have the kind of personal warmth and the personal qualities that would seem to go with that. I met him the first time, strangely, when he was on a committee that interviewed me for the position at the National University of Ireland in Galway that he had previously held. Shortly after that, he invited me to visit him and Joan in Colchester, and we quickly became friends.
And I remember my first meeting with Kevin. He was very enthusiastic about having me on board in the university. But one of the first things he did was give me this book. And it's very important because it's by Thomas Jabin and Richard Claude, called Human Rights and Statistics. And this book is signed by Kevin, and he said, you have to read this before you get started. And interestingly, for the last 18 years now at Essex, I've been spending a lot of my research and teaching time dedicated to the measurement and analysis of human rights. And I have to really tie that interest back to my initial meetings with Kevin and his enthusiastic support of that particular project. So there are all sorts of people, and I think this conference is important in celebrating Kevin's contribution, all sorts of people that were linked into Kevin in some way, who he inspired and got to do wonderful things with their career development and their practice in the field of human rights. So this little piece from me is just to thank Kevin personally for his inspiration over the many years that we worked together, and for that initial meeting where he said to me, you ought to read this. So thank you.
Subsequently, after I left Essex, I moved to Strasbourg, where he is nothing short of a legend around Strasbourg. He was a true colossus in terms of litigating there. Everyone from every country, from Russia to Turkey to the UK to Ireland, specifically Ireland, knows his name, and I don't think they can have any higher praise than that, so we'll never forget him.
I met Kevin in 2001 when he came to the Belgrade Center for Human Rights for a brainstorming session on the Bankovic case, where he was impressive. I have a very vivid memory of Kevin and Françoise impressively exchanging their expertise on the ECHR, which have triggered my interest in human rights litigation, and I remain grateful for this inspiration. I remember how he shared my excitement when I started working with the European Court of Human Rights. If someone else from Essex was coming to Strasbourg, he would always try to put us in touch.
On the very first day that I started to work at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, it was evident to me just how well respected and renowned he was here as well. When I was introduced to members of the registry, senior members of the registry, and Judge Bratzer, and I mentioned that I'd been studying in Essex, all of them spoke about Kevin with a great deal of warmth and respect.
Kevin Boyle was a militant, and he was very aware of the problems this country is facing, and his main goal was improving conditions of democracy and freedom in this country. His lessons remain alive with us, human rights activists, academics, and Brazilians as a whole.
He remains as a great source of inspiration for all of us who are human rights defenders, for his commitment, his devotion, his passion towards human dignity.
It's often not realised that actually academic life is full of routine, but around Kevin, the routine was enlivened by the unexpected. Sometimes Kevin himself was responsible for triggering the project or whatever it was. For example, he had the big ideas for the democratic audit and for the freedom of religion or religious belief project. Sometimes opportunities arose and Kevin seized them, such as the strange idea that we might sue 17 governments at once and seek to secure accountability for the acts of NATO. That became the Bankovic case.
At the first time that I saw him, I knew with him that we had to work with our head, our heart and our head. He organized a huge conference in Brasilia, putting together judges, lawyers from different parts of the world, South Africa, India, Caribbean, Europe, Latin America. He wanted to make all these people share their experiences and make them understand that it would make sense to advance human rights in domestic level, learning from others' experiences.
Now you might think that someone so at ease in the world of academia, ideas, politicians, thinking, would be at ease in the world around him. I'm not talking about the domestic sphere, I'm talking about out in the street. In fact, crossing the street with Kevin was quite an experience. I'd first got a whiff of this where I thought he was a bit cautious in the UK, but where it was really striking was Turkey. To get back to our hotel after a day of fact-finding hearings, we had to cross a dual carriageway. No zebra crossing, and going to traffic lights would have meant a big detour. So the rest of us wriggled our way through the traffic, paused on the island, and wriggled our way across the second half. When we turned round, Kevin had not moved. For him to cross the road, the traffic had to be stationary or non-existent. It's a wonder to me that he isn't yet waiting on the side of the road in Ankara in order to cross the street. That kind of memory of Kevin is as much part of Kevin as the man who could think of big ideas and who would act on them in order to try and use the law to make things better for people.
Kevinish was what we called those emails you got from Kevin where there would be memorable typos or his capacity to mispronounce things sometimes at critical junctures. So for example, during one hearing before the European Commission of Human Rights, Kevin was questioning a witness and he mispronounced the name of the commanding officer and lead in charge of a operation. And that led everyone else in the courtroom to think that Kevin was accusing a member of the government legal team of having led an abusive military operation. And so everyone was somewhat flustered and waiting and anticipating where this line of questioning might lead, when suddenly it dawned on me that this was not actually about to lead to the unmasking of a war criminal amongst the government legal team, but was Kevinism. So I had to interrupt Kevin and fix the record. But what was so wonderful about it was Kevin, at that stage, was known for Kevinish, and no one in the courtroom for a minute thought that he had deliberately tried to mislead anybody. And Kevin himself as well was blissfully unaware of why he had caused so much consternation or that he had mispronounced anything.
I can remember meeting him for the first time in the 1980s. I wasn't working with him back then. He was given a paper at the Irish Centre in London. I'd gone along and asked him a question at the end, and then he came and found me after when I was about to leave, and he said, "I must get back and talk to you more." And we met again and we set up a conference, and boy could Kevin not organise things to save his life. Drinking sessions and breweries spring to mind.
One brief story about Kevin. In the 1980s I was working for a non-governmental organisation called the National Council for Civil Liberties, now known as Liberty. And not far from our offices were the offices of Article 19. And Kevin was the first director of Article 19. And we agreed that our two respective organisations, Article 19 and NCCL, should collaborate on a small project to prepare together a small briefing and publish it on the incorporation of the European Convention on Human Rights into UK law. And I like to think that in some small way that contributed to the subsequent change in the UK law and the Human Rights Act.
At Article 19, the International Centre on Censorship, he was without doubt the prevailing genius and the chief combatant in the cause of freedom of expression. As an editor, Kevin had a truly amazing command of the English language. This was founded on a direct but beguiling written and spoken style with an absolute fluency in the nuances of legal language. Nuances which he knew had the power to either make or break a legal argument, and in turn make or break human lives. I will never forget the amazing campaign we established in defense of Salman Rushdie and his publishers shortly after the notorious fatwa was issued, calling for the British author's death for his crime of writing and publishing the novel The Satanic Verses. Through Kevin's contacts and those of William Shawcross, who was then the chair of the board of Article 19, we were able to gather several hundred authors' signatures, the majority of whom were world-renowned, many of them Nobel Prize winners, as well as leading cultural and political leaders from all over the world to come together and sign what we called a world statement. The statement was published as a full-page spread in the majority of the world's leading newspapers. Kevin worked day and night to make that sort of thing happen. He had a sort of kinetic energy, a way of galvanizing a team. I had the pleasure of meeting with Kevin again at Colchester University, and it was as if we had never parted. Colchester is where my daughter Natasha Piet chose to study, and she is now an undergraduate student at the university. I introduced Kevin to Natasha and then gently explained to him that my daughter would never have been born had he not had made the audacious effort to introduce me and to my beautiful wife. So a little known fact about Kevin is that he was also a champion matchmaker.
When I was getting married, he just kept giving me all these very good ideas and was truly happy every time that something good happened to you. We are very lucky because he left us a wonderful legacy. He wasn't just a caring and loving person, but he was a brilliant practitioner and academic. He just didn't react to problems in his field, but he sought to create avenues from which not only him, but others could build upon.
When I went to visit Kevin mid-December, just a few days actually before he died, it was 11th of December, just after Human Rights Day. And I remember that in this moment I was about to see him and he was not very well, but we had this really passionate discussion about human rights, and Kevin was telling me that according to him, what's important for the future of human rights is the implementation. And we had all this discussion about it, and he had all this passion. And even in this moment, you could see in his eyes and his discussion all this, this humanity he had in him, and that's something I think is very striking.
There was some event here at the university campus with stands, etc. And he was going around and talking to each one of them, and he'd forgotten about an appointment that we had and was very embarrassed about it afterwards. But he said, for me this is very important to interact with the students who are enthusiastic and young and passionate.
I just remember him being very down to earth and just talking to individual students during breaks, just treating us on exactly the same level. There was no difference between the lecturer and the students, and just being very respectful. He knew our names. After a week he knew all our names, and he would know where we were from, he would know our background, everything, and he would encourage us to contribute.
What was amazing is the fact somebody of that stature was willing to help you come one-on-one, helping you towards your future studies, and even he was also going to be a reference for me for my masters, and it was actually a great honour to have known him and be taught by him.
With the creation of the Human Rights Centre Undergraduate Forum, an initiative which he has encouraged and supported from the very start, and the organisation of the Human Rights in Asia Conference, I realised that my first impression of him was very true. He's one of the humblest, kindest and most encouraging person that I have met. I feel blessed to have known him.
He was really, really nice, and he always was very supportive, even though he was going through a very difficult time. Even at the end, he was always with us.
I think what struck me the most about him was his humbleness and the way he was very close to his students.
As a student, I felt that he really got down to my level and just addressed me, and I liked that very much about him. So he had this personality that was very appealing to me.
He will remain in my heart as a role model for human rights. Thank you very much for everything you have done for me.
To me, Kevin is an inspiration because he was the one who encouraged us to organize this Asian conference on Asian values. Because first we thought that it was impossible to organize such a conference So I think we should remember Kevin as the father of the Asian students.
Are you with me is a sentence that Kevin often used, and one thing we could always feel is that he was with us with many things, also after our year at Essex, and the help he gave us with the Asian conference was really great, and to see now how this is something that is kept rolling is really nice, and part of the legacy of Kevin.
Inside his classes he passed us his knowledge, but outside he truly enlightened us with his wisdom. He was a master in seeing the best in everybody, as he nurtured us and encouraged us to pursue our goals in life. For me and for many other students, he was so much more than a professor. He was a mentor. Dear Kevin, thank you so much for everything, and I promise you that I will never lose that smile nor that passion you were so keen on.
From Kevin Boyle, we can learn that human rights is not something only about the legal argumentation, but it's also a struggle.
And so I think that it's very powerful what Kevin was saying about the universality of freedom of expression. And apart from that, of course, he was a wonderful colleague. We co-supervised a student together, and
Kevin was one of my main supporters in terms of pursuing human rights studies whilst I was working at the Human Rights Centre. And I remember one of the first times I met him was actually when he and Françoise came to my office, I think, during the first week that I was working at the centre, and they came to introduce themselves. But I remember very clearly that their introduction was by way of bickering, because they for some reason were sort of bickering about a project that they were thinking of getting my help with as in my new role.
It was back in 2004 when, with a few friends, we created a human rights NGO, and Professor Boyle and Professor Rodley accepted enthusiastically to be our honorary members to help us in our endeavor. This represents in a perfect manner the spirit of Kevin and the spirit of all the professors in Essex. They're always ready to encourage you and support you and to make you progress in your work and in your activities.
Kevin was at the forefront of supporting student initiatives and working to make sure that we had a network and a support system. And that's in addition to his own academic success. I'm lucky that now I've inherited much of what he worked for in supporting student initiatives between the Essex Human Rights Review and the Essex Human Rights Clinic.
Kevin's support for the Essex Human Rights Review allowed it to become a respected, peer-reviewed international journal associated with the prestigious Human Rights Center at the University of Essex.
Without Kevin, the review wouldn't have achieved what it has. Kevin provided us with great support, so the review became an internationally respected human rights journal.
Over the holidays, I wasn't able to get home, and he and Joan welcomed me into their home for a lovely dinner. I have a great memory of that evening with the two of them. That year I was also the class rep, and I feel quite certain that we drove Kevin crazy. But he also understood that our priority was the strengthening and improvement of an already great program, and since that was his objective, we always managed to find solutions to the issues of concern for us.
he seemed to have an unerring knack of detecting when a student was having difficulties. Often the first indication that I had of this would be that I would get one of Kevin's inimitable emails. Not all was entirely accurately typed because he had a rather fraught relationship with technology. He didn't just present me with problems, he presented solutions as well. But he really cared for students and he cared for his colleagues as well.
His deep affection for the students who passed through the centre's doors was both obvious and very sincere. He never once lost his enthusiasm for them, and his door was always open. So much so that a former colleague of mine once set his screensaver to say, "Just say no." As some of my HRC colleagues may recall, I occasionally referred to Kevin as Captain Chaos. This was a term of endearment that made reference to his administrative skills.
I think his mind or his brain just walked away faster than he could actually write. He was thinking about the next job to do before he finished writing, and I think that was most
But he wasn't a very good typist, was he?
He wasn't perfect, but he was to us. It was our Kevin. I think my lasting impression of Kevin was when the other academics wrote their testimonies.
Yes, that's right.
And we had a special function for him. And he ate quite heartily because hospital food wasn't very nice. He said it was the best thing that he'd been to. He said he'd been to many events throughout the years, but that was the one that meant the most to him. He was a very human man.
Very much so. And my son had a serious car accident because his wife taught my son at school. And both of them, every day I would either get an email or I'd be stopped in the corridor to find out how my son was progressing. And it was genuine. It wasn't just someone saying, as a matter of passing in the day. It was genuine. They were really concerned.
He always took his time to make sure that he said hello to you, that he always thanked you for your work, for everything that you'd done for the centre. He always hosted the end of year student party for us at his house. It was always a lovely event, and I know the students and staff very much enjoyed it.
The 2010 to 2011 intake of human rights students were the first not to have been taught by Kevin, and that's since I joined Essex, and it's a great shame that they and future students will not have the opportunity to meet him and get to know him, an experience that would have enhanced their lives.
He inspired those around him, and he put together brilliant teams, and he made people achieve more than they would ever have achieved on their own, and he made people believe in themselves, so that they went on to produce work that they never would have without him being there, without him having, as we've often said, a strategic vision of where things might go.
Kevin just was very, very well known as a major international human rights figure. We miss him a lot, we all miss him a lot, and I still find myself having conversations with him because they were about the most rewarding aspects of intellectual exchange here at the university. We miss him.
Mr. Boyle, Professor Boyle, please.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my name is Kevin Boyle, and I'm a professor in the University of Essex and in the Human Rights Centre there. And I appeal to the government of Azerbaijan to release Amin Milli and Adnan Hajidara, who have been wrongfully imprisoned for exercising their freedom of expression. So please release them immediately.